wanted to discuss with you today and share with you, and that is, quote, the next 50 days are the most fateful for Israel since the Yom Kippur War. This stated by former head of Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, Tzachi Hanegbi, and he hints at a timetable for an Iranian attack. He says, we now stand, in my opinion, before the 50 most fateful days in Israel's history, since perhaps the Yom Kippur War, in which there were also several dozen fateful days. By the way, the Yom Kippur War had a devastating effect on Israel. We had very many casualties during that war. Hanegbi said that the Prime Minister will have to make decisions that will bear a price tag. Allowing Iranian nuclear weapons has a price tag. The practical result will be a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, he explained. Today, when we say that we understand the danger of the Iranian threat and understand that a confrontation bears a price, it is because we want to prevent our sons and grandsons from paying unbearable prices. Israel could expect, by the way, a serious retaliation from the Hezbollah, Hamas, and other Arab entities which choose to try to join in the annihilation of the Jewish people here in Israel. And amongst all of this, relations between the Obama administration and Israel are souring. Obama is in the midst of a re-election campaign and doesn't want to be bothered about the Iranian nuclear threat, not realizing that this is not just an Israeli problem, but a problem which the whole world will face. Very disturbing is an article that was just written entitled, Obama's Intelligence Agencies Urge Preparing for a Post-Israel Middle East. Here to tell us more about that, we have Carl in Jerusalem from the very popular blog called Israel Matzav. Shalom, Carl.
Shalom, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, thank you. You had a very interesting blog post on your blog called U.S. Prepares for a Post-Israel Middle East by Franklin Lamb. Now, we're going to talk about that in a moment, but before we do, let's just give our listeners a little introduction to your blog, Israel Matzav, which means Israel's situation, I guess. Is that the best way to translate it?
Yeah, that's the best way to translate it.
Okay. All right, so for anybody who's not familiar with the Israeli blog sphere, they should just know that Israel Matzav is a very important and popular blog in the Israeli blog sphere, and you should absolutely check it out if you've never seen it before. So you just go to israelmatzav.blogspot.co.il, and I will also put a link on our website for that, so you just have to click to get there. All right, so this disturbing article that was written by someone who you describe as not so friendly to Israel, not so pro-Israel, and you write here in your blog's title, Obama's quote-unquote intelligence agencies urge preparing for a post-Israel Middle East. That means that they're preparing for a Middle East without Israel, that Israel is annihilated perhaps by Iran or by some other means?
Well, they don't quite come out and say that, but what they say is that the United States ought to be, that Israel is costing the United States its relationship, A, with Arab and Muslim countries, and B, specifically with Iran. And they're suggesting, and this is supposedly, I mean, the guy claims that he got this report from someone in the CIA. It's not available online, I've looked. But the report claims that basically just about every intelligence agency in the United States has decided that the United States would be better off with better relations with Iran than with having good relations with Israel. You know, and the reaction, the one person who actually knew who this guy was, told me the guy's a liar, he makes stuff up, don't believe him, and that happened to be another big blogger who told me that.
All right, but that's just his opinion. We're not saying that here on Israel National Radio. We don't know.
We don't know.
That's his opinion. Okay.
And what's worse, if you look at some of the articles that have come out in the 3 or 4 days since I've published that, there are a lot of indications that, in fact, the Obama administration is thinking that way. For example, there was the big story over the weekend about the, what do they call it, austere challenge, the joint exercise being cut by about 70% of the troops.
Okay, so we have to explain that. So basically, Israel and America had planned this massive joint military exercise together, and now all of a sudden the United States, or at least the Obama administration, has decided to cut by more than half of the people, of their troops who were supposed to participate in this. They've cut them down. This is a signal to Israel that they're not so pleased and happy with our approach to how to handle Iran. Is that what you would agree to?
I would agree with that. I think it's important to add that that exercise wasn't just any military exercise, but it was one that was supposed to specifically practice using anti-missile systems that Israel would need to intercept missiles coming from Iran or from Hezbollah or from Hamas. And among other things, they've now cut it back. They cut it from 5,000 troops to somewhere between 12 and 1,500. They're sending Patriot missile batteries over here, but they're not sending the people to man them. And in addition, the United States has an X-band radar installation somewhere in the Negev, which was actually a parting gift from President Bush. However, that installation is run entirely by American troops, which is not unusual, by the way. Every place else in the world the U.S. has X-band installed is also run by American troops. But what the effect would be if they did not pass on information in a timely manner is that we would lose about 7 minutes of warning, which is significant, in the event that Iran launches a missile at us. I mean, the X-band is supposed to be so sensitive that it can sense a softball being thrown 1,000 miles away.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what they say about it.
So, and now I'm getting headlines in my inbox, in my email, saying headlines like, the United States is assuring Iran that it is not backing Netanyahu in any attacks because perhaps the United States is afraid of any escalation of and war right before the elections. Also, they're worried about their ships in the Hormuz area, the Straits of Hormuz, and they don't want any trouble. They want quiet until they believe that Obama can be possibly reelected for a second term. So we're seeing all of this coming together. I also read out in my last show about an article where tensions between Netanyahu and the American ambassador here, Shapiro, got very, very hot, and yelling basically took place, and Netanyahu is firm that the American government is not doing enough, that they, instead of pressuring Iran to discontinue its quest for nuclear weapons, instead it's pressuring Israel not to attack Iran, and this is unacceptable. So all of this is going into exactly what you posted, that this, that America may be looking at a post-Israel Middle East. So why don't you go into more about this information that this writer talked about?
Okay. Oh, I got to pull the post up.
Okay, so this is written by Franklin Lamb in order to give him credit for this, and again it's called U.S. Prepares for a Post-Israel Middle East. And he listed here things that apparently he got from a CIA friend of his, and it's pretty disturbing stuff, but I think that we need to put it out there and let all of you know this, give you this information.
Yeah. Hold on. Unfortunately, I didn't pull this up. I pulled everything else.
Okay, I'll read the first paragraph while you're looking. It says here, it's a paper entitled Preparing for a Post-Israel Middle East, an 82-page analysis that concludes that the American national interest is fundamentally at odds with that of Zionist Israel. The author concludes that Israel is currently the greatest threat to U.S. national interest because its nature and actions prevent normal U.S. relations with Arab and Muslim countries and, to a growing degree, the wider international community. Did you write that, or is that from Lamb?
Yeah, what you read was from Franklin Lamb, and the findings, frankly, are very, very worrisome for Israel. It's possible that some of this is exaggerated. It's not likely, and unfortunately, there's just too much here that fits in with too many other things we've seen before. I mean, let me run through some of the findings. He says, Israel, given its current brutal occupation of belligerents, cannot be salvaged any more than apartheid South Africa. Well, that's a great comparison.
Right, and a wrong one.
The Israel leadership, with its increasing support of the 700,000 settlers in illegal colonies in the occupied West Bank, is out of touch with the political, military, and economic realities of the Middle East.
The opposite.
It's exactly the opposite.
Right.
I think we're very much in touch with, certainly with the military reality of the Middle East, because we can't have Hamas having, guns and missiles and everything else sitting in the hills of the Shomron.
Now, Carl, is this written by the author, or is this written in the report that the author received?
Well, he's claiming that it's written in the report that he received, but since no one else has seen the report, there's really no way to know.
Okay.
The problem is that so much of this fits in with the rhetoric of the Obama administration.
All right.
I mean, where I see things going is, if Obama wins and if we don't attack Iran between now and the elections, then I envision a scenario where Obama blackmails us, quite frankly, in a second term, and says, you want me to give to take care of Iran for you, you go back to the 49 armistice lines and give the Palestinians everything else. And then it becomes a question of, are we committing suicide slowly or are we doing it quickly?
Right.
Because that's really what it comes down to.
As I say, when we divide the world into the West and with the Muslim world, it's like Esau and Ishmael, correct?
Correct.
And I say, Ishmael wants to kill us, and Esau wants us to kill ourselves. So either way, we're dead. All right.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. But the problem here is that Obama doesn't understand that this is not an Israel problem, that Iran is a world problem, in that, and I say this over and over again, when they are at their demonstrations, they're yelling first the Saturday people and then the Sunday people. That's the West. First the little Satan and then the big Satan. That's America. They're burning the American flag alongside the Israeli flag. So it's just, they're going to feed us to the wolf, but then they're going to be the next sheep that's going to go to the wolf. And this is a world problem. It's not an Israeli problem.
It's a world problem and not an Israeli problem, but I don't think it's fair to say that Obama doesn't understand that. I mean, Obama came into office with the intent to improve, as he sees it, American relations with the Islamic world. Quite bluntly, he sucked up to the Islamic world. He went to Cairo. He gave his whole speech. He was frankly quite fawning in that speech.
He bowed in front of the Saudi king, Prince
That's right. He bowed to the Saudi king. And I think that if Obama is God forbid reelected, we're going to see more and more of the 2009 Obama.
Oh, this is very, very disturbing.
Yeah, extremely. And the problem is, I don't think that you would think that a big chunk of American Jewry would appreciate it, would appreciate that, would understand that. The best case scenarios I've seen have Obama getting 60% of the Jewish vote. Not to mention how much Jewish money is financing his campaign.
But last elections, it was 80% of the Jewish vote he got.
78%. So it is a significant drop. But Jimmy Carter didn't get 60% of the Jewish vote in 1980 because the American Jewish community recognized him for what he was. And also because they had a so-called independent for whom they could pull the lever and not have to vote Republican. American Jews are constitutionally incapable, in many cases, of voting Republican. They just, it's something that it's starting to change, but I think it's largely starting to change because the Orthodox and more traditional component of American Jewry is becoming a bigger percentage, and that's why it's starting to change.
And we know that most of the left-wing Jews in America are not religious Jews.
That's correct. There are some, believe me, I get some very nasty emails from people who invoke God's name a whole bunch of times. But, and frankly, I've just put them on spam. I just have to keep doing it often because the person keeps changing address. Person or people keep changing addresses. But, at the end of the day, a very large portion of American Jewry just doesn't get it.
All right, let's go back to the last point that you read. You read here, which he lists in his article, the Israel leadership, with its increasing support of the 700,000 settlers. First of all, that's not true. So they just threw out 50 more families from their homes, and next will be another community and another one to follow, God forbid. And then he goes on and says that these are illegal colonies in the occupied West Bank. Well, we know that the West Bank is not occupied when it's under Jewish rule because this was our land. And in fact, by legality, there was just a report put out in Israel that the communities in Judea and Samaria are completely legal.
That's correct. And it's very unfortunate that the Netanyahu government has not had the courage to adopt the Levy report. It's very, very unfortunate. I'm hoping that, certainly if Romney is elected, there's no reason he shouldn't do so.
Let me just continue here if I can, Carl, just to finish this one point that you just read. It says here that Israel is increasingly out of touch with the political, military, and economic realities of the Middle East. Let's just dissect each one of those. Politically, Israel has got to be in there because when we handed over authority to the Palestinian Authority, they can't even take out their garbage. They are known for corruption. So politically, they have failed in their part of the deal of the Oslo Accords. Militarily, Israel cannot exist if they are able to make a military there because they are right on top of our international airport. They're just a few kilometers from Jerusalem, Israel's capital city. They're a few kilometers from Tel Aviv, Israel's major population center area. And so they're completely wrong. And economically, they are sucking on the teat of the international community and always begging for more and more money, as many of them are probably siphoning some of this money off into their Swiss bank accounts. But they can't support themselves. They can't do it politically. They're, as I said, corrupt. Militarily, they're terrorists. So everything in that point that you just read was completely and utterly untrue.
That's right. I agree. I agree with you 100%. In fact, I don't know if you saw it, but there was an article earlier, towards the end of last week, that said that there are 600 millionaires in Gaza.
Right, I read that also. That's true.
Yeah. That's astounding.
All right, so we have come to the end of this segment. Can you stay on with us for the next segment so we can go through some more of these points?
Absolutely.
All right, so we're speaking again with Carl in Jerusalem. He is the author of the blog Israel Matzav. You can go to his website during the break and check it out. It's israelmatzav.blogspot.co.il.
I think that Obama looks at Israel as being an extension of colonial Europe. In fact, he looks at us as the last vestige of colonialism. His father wrote a book against colonialism. His father was a Kenyan, of course, and he wrote a book against colonialism. And I think that Obama was very much influenced by his father's views.
Can I interrupt you for a minute and just ask you, Carl, if you remember the American flag and what it first looked like before it had the 50 states?
It had 13 stars and 13 stripes.
13 stars in a circle, which represented what?
Which represented the 13 colonies of England.
That's right. So, it's like, this is like what is it called? The teapot calling the kettle black, or something? What is that phrase?
The pot calling the kettle black.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay.
Indeed. But, I think that Obama has the Wall Street Journal over the weekend described it as, indifference at best, and that's very true. I don't know if you saw the Wall Street Journal editorial which was published, I think officially late Friday night, early Shabbat morning, which was just devastating. I mean, I think it's been summarized in all of the newspapers here. I put it on my blog.
I saw it, yeah.
It's just reached the point that his open hostility to Israel is just, if he's reelected, it's going to be deadly for us. I mean, it's just, we're going to have a very rough time.
So, just to repeat something that you said in the last segment for anybody who just tuned in, you were saying that Israel, according to at least the Obama administration, because we know that we have many wonderful friends in America, and not everybody agrees with Obama's policies, but according to Obama, he views Israel as a bone in his throat, that it is a state that is preventing him from cozying up closer to the oil-rich countries of the Middle East, that he has to always watch what he does, because if he throws Israel to the dogs, he's going to lose a lot of votes. And also Israel, by the way, helps America in many things, militarily, intelligence-wise, etc., etc. We're the only quote-unquote democracy in the Middle East, and Israel is also, after we're gone, we're like the canary in the coal mine. They would be coming after the West. So, but he doesn't see it that way. He sees it as, we want to, do more business, we want to do more, make closer contacts with the Arab world, and Israel is always stopping us from doing that.
I'm not even sure he sees it as an impediment to business or anything like that. I don't think he sees it in economic terms. I think that he sees it in terms of his own view of justice, is that, we are colonial interlopers, that we came and took the Palestinians' land, although anybody who's ever read from time immemorial knows that's not true. But I don't think it's not even a question of economics with Obama, and that's why he's not approachable on the issue, because I think there's very little doubt that Israel contributes an incredible amount economically to the United States in terms of job creation, in terms of R&D facilities used by American companies here like Intel and Microsoft and Cisco. It's not a question of economics, and I don't think it's even a question of oil, because quite frankly, I mean, our natural gas reserves are now estimated at the same level as Libya's. So it's not economic at all with Obama. I think it's a question of this is what he believes is moral and correct, is that the land belongs to the Palestinians, and he's going to do everything he can do to undermine our hold on it.
So I want to ask our listeners, who did God take out of Egypt in order to bring them to the land of Israel? He brought out the Hebrews, correct? Who speaks Hebrew today? The Arabs or the Jews? I mean, it's obvious. Okay, so let's get back to this article here. You were talking about some of the points of why Israel is a bone in the throat of the United States, and how post-Middle East post-Israel in the Middle East would be perhaps something that they could be looking forward to. He talks here now about the Arab Spring. Can you just read that for us and comment?
Sure. He says the Arab Spring and Islamic awakening has to a major degree freed a large majority of the 1.2 billion Arab and Muslims to pursue what an overwhelming majority believe is the illegitimate, immoral, and unsustainable European occupation of Palestine of the indigenous population. And first of all, anybody who believes that the Arab Spring has freed the Arabs ought to go look at what's going on in Egypt right now. There was a report that for the first time, an Egyptian female newscaster appeared with a hijab on television, and apparently it made quite a stir there. I've been following some of the Egyptian democracy people for a long time on Twitter, long before last February, and these guys are all basically saying we traded in a secular dictatorship for an Islamic dictatorship. What have we done to ourselves? I think it's a myth to say that the Arab Spring has freed anybody. There's not been a single country that has, overthrown its government as part of the so-called Arab Spring that has become a true democracy. and it doesn't look likely to happen anytime soon.
And the next point that he lists here?
Well, then he goes on to say, simultaneous with but predating rapidly expanding Arab and Muslim power in the region, as evidenced by the Arab Spring Islamic awakening and ascendancy of Iran, as American power and influence recedes, the U.S. commitment to belligerent, oppressive Israel, oh good grief, is becoming impossible to defend or execute, consistent given paramount U.S. national interests. That sentence is kind of butchered, but that's the way it's written, which include normalizing relations with the 57 Islamic countries. Maybe that's why Obama thought there were 57 United States.
Oh, you know what? Could be.
Could be. But, you know, I think one of the keys here is American power and influence receding is a direct result of Obama's policies. Obama has abandoned just about every ally the United States had, and it's not just Israel. It's the British, and it's Honduras, and it's the Ukraine, and it's Georgia, and, you know, I mean, all of those countries were abandoned by Obama, and I think he's conscientiously degraded American military capabilities, and I think every American who's serving in any part of the U.S. Armed Forces is well aware of that. I mean, he apparently spoke to an audience on Sunday that was silent. No one applauded him. There's an ad that was put out about 10 days ago, which I embedded on my blog, which was done by Navy SEALs, who said, you know why we're not voting for Obama? He thinks he's the one who killed bin Laden. Well, he wasn't. I mean, just the whole attitude has been one of, you know, America's no different than any other country. Obama has specifically rejected the idea of what they call American exceptionalism, which I have to say, American exceptionalism, at least till Obama took office, was very, very true. I mean, there's absolutely no, and not just in military terms. I mean, the United States was, you know, a very different country, frankly, for Jews than any place else Jews had ever lived. And it's just changed. What's happened in the last 4 years, and the speed with which he has managed to degrade the United States military and economic capabilities is just appalling. So when he talks about receding American influence here, well, that's a direct result of Obama's policies.
You know, I just want to say here that with the 57 Islamic countries that it seems like he wants to trade Israel for those 57. Israel is worth more than 57 of those types of countries. In fact, if you remember, for many years there was a boycott against Israel, more or less. I guess maybe boycott's not the right word, but Pepsi Cola would not sell to Israel because they wanted to sell to the Arab world, and the Arab world said, if you sell to Israel, we are not going to buy. So they didn't sell to us, and then afterwards they saw Coca-Cola was making so much money here that they finally dropped the embargo, or whatever you call it, and they started selling to Israel. They said they made more money selling to only Israel than to all of these Arab countries around us. And whenever we do these swaps for soldiers and prisoners, it's always one Israeli is worth like over 1,000 of theirs. So he's got his math wrong. When it comes to Israel, we defy these numbers.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so the next point that he gives, gross Israel interference. Why don't you continue there?
Yeah, gross Israeli interference in the internal affairs of the United States through spying and illegal U.S. arms transfers. This includes supporting more than 60 front organizations and approximately 7,500 U.S. officials who do Israel's bidding and seek to dominate and intimidate the media and agencies of the U.S. government, which should no longer be condoned. That's out-and-out anti-Semitism.
The next one, the United States government no longer has the financial resources. Keep going.
Or public support to continue funding Israel. The billions of dollars in direct and indirect U.S. aid from taxpayers to Israel since 1967 is not affordable and is increasingly being objected to by U.S. taxpayers who oppose continuing American military involvement in the Middle East. Well, that's downright incorrect. First of all, because the last poll I saw, I think Israel had something like a 65 or 67% positive rating, and it had not been higher in many, many years. In fact, it may not have ever been higher, whereas the Palestinians were about 16% or something like that. Second of all, the money that the United States gives Israel is mostly spent in the United States. Certainly almost all of the military money is spent in the United States. In other words, it comes right back to the United States. It creates American jobs. And, I mean, the amount of intelligence.
And doesn't Israel have to pay this money back also?
A lot of it they do. Some
Okay.
of it is
So
some of it's loans, some of it's grants.
And we have to make clear here that no country, including the United States, including Israel, including anybody, no country does anything that is not in their interest. In other words, if the United States gave a budget to give a certain amount of money to Israel or to Egypt or to any other country, it's because they have an interest in order that that country either behave some way or purchase their equipment, or they just make these investments in order to ease their whatever it is. There's always an interest. They don't do it because it's hurting me, but I'm going to be nice to you. They do it because it's in their interest to do so. They're obviously getting something back from it. And as you said, any money that Israel's getting, let's say America gives Israel $60 million, that $60 million can't just be spent on purchasing tractors to make apartments or whatever it is, to level out land to make apartments. That money has to go back into the United States, where we purchase equipment, military equipment and things from the American companies, and that in turn employs Americans and keeps these companies going, etc., etc., etc.
That's right.
Okay, and the next one?
The next one. Israel's segregationist occupation infrastructure, evidenced by legalized discrimination and increasingly separate and unequal justice systems, must no longer be directly or indirectly funded by the U.S. taxpayers or ignored by the U.S. government.
You want to comment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I have to say that the Arabs who live under the so-called occupation live better than Arabs do in any Arab country. But more significantly, there was a poll done of so-called East Jerusalem Arabs, I guess it's about 2 years ago now, by a guy named Pollock, who used to be an American government post. Here it is, Dr. Pollock. I actually have a blurb about him that I got from the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. His name was Dr. David Pollock, and he was chief of the Near East, South Asia, Africa research at the U.S. Information Agency. And that poll found that something like 60% of the so-called East Jerusalem Arabs said that they would move if they had to remain in Israel if there is ever a Palestinian state that divides Jerusalem. So, I mean, as supposedly bad as these people have it, it's just, I mean, they know themselves that they are much better off in Israel than they would be in any Arab country.
Women who are Arab women here can go to university, they can become judges, they can become doctors, lawyers, whatever they like. We have on our Supreme Court, we have Arabs sitting there. So, and women couldn't do this in other Arab countries. Maybe some they could, but they certainly don't have the freedom of speech. They don't have the freedom of being able to go out on their own and refuse a marriage or whatever it is. They are under our laws here, and they are protected under our laws.
Correct. I don't think people appreciate the extent to which Arabs are integrated in Israeli society. If you go out to the mall, if you go down to Mamila today, you will see dozens of Arabs walking around there. If you go up north, one of my children went and stayed in a Zimmer a couple weeks ago up north, and with a group of her friends.
A Zimmer is like a bed and breakfast. Go ahead.
Right, and without even realizing it, they started playing with this little kid who turned out to be an Arab, whose parents were taking a vacation in the same Zimmer.
My physical therapist was an Arab.
Yeah,
and I've had doctors in the hospital who are Arabs. I mean, they're everywhere, just like you say. So there is none of this apartheid that they're talking about. There is none of this segregation, unless they are under the Palestinian Authority, and then they're not occupied because they're under their own government in the Palestinian Authority. So
that's right.
It's ridiculous.
That's right.
Okay, we only have about 4 minutes left. So what other points here would you like to speak about?
I think that one of the significant points here is towards the end. The expanding chasm among American Jews objecting to Zionism and Israeli practices, including the killing of brutalizing of Palestinians under Israeli occupation, are gross violations of American and international law and raise questions within the U.S. Jewish community regarding the American responsibility to protect R2P, innocent civilians under occupation. That's Peter Biner. I don't know how familiar you are with Peter Biner and his writings, but that sounds like it could have been written by Peter Biner. The so-called responsibility to protect was the doctrine that was invoked when the United States decided to lead from behind and interfere in Libya. And it was pretty clear right from the outset that the only other place where that doctrine might ever be applied was right here in Israel. As to the American Jewish community, I think it's important to point out that the leftist organizations that are most outside the mainstream, and by that I mean the likes of Jewish Voice for Peace and J Street, are dominated by children of intermarriages and out-and-out non-Jews. People don't even realize the money comes from non-Jews. A couple of years ago, I published on my blog where the largest contribution to J Street came from. And it came from somebody in Hong Kong who had the money donated through his secretary. I was able to confirm it. And, it's like, what does this guy have to do with Israel? I'm looking at this and there was nothing I could see in his background that had anything to do with Israel. So, it's...
Something's fishy.
Something's really fishy. That's right. This woman in Hong Kong donated $800,000, some bizarre amount, not a round amount, to J Street.
Yeah, well, we know that George Soros is involved heavily with J Street.
But this is not the mainstream Jewish community. There was somebody who was supporting Jewish Voice for Peace was exposed as being not Jewish a couple weeks ago, or last week. The mainstream Jewish community still does support Israel. The people who self-identify as Jews for some other purpose other than being trotted out as the house Jew to oppose Israel still support Israel.
You would think that the Obama administration would want to support a country that has laws and a justice system rather than an entity that harbors, sponsors, and protects terrorists, and where the terrorists are coming out from that entity. It's a corrupt entity. They keep pouring millions and millions of dollars each year into the Palestinian Authority, and what they produce, their export, is terror.
Yeah, but that's the United States would not want to support that kind of a terror entity. Obama, on the other hand, is very happy to support that terror entity because he believes that Israel has to go in whatever way possible.
Well, this has been really, really interesting and also disturbing, and we have to stop now just because we've come to the end of the show, but I want to encourage everybody to check out the blog post that Carl in Jerusalem put up. It's on israelmatzah.blogspot.co.il, and the blog post was from Friday, the 31st of August, and it is called Obama's Intelligence Agencies Urge Preparing for a Post-Israel Middle East. I'm looking forward to more of your comments there. I'm seeing what your readers are leaving there as comments as well. Thank you very much, Carl and
My
Susan,
pleasure.
for being with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Do it again sometime.
A lot to chew on. And until tomorrow, when I'm back with you again, shalom.